many important issues regarding South Asia, which includes India, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and much more. So, well, Kanak has a deep interest in Nepalese politics. He's also been a victim of it because of his philanthropic activities. He has been in the forefront in combating environmental change and in creating a rehabilitation center for those with spinal injuries. And this has been a remarkable effort which has brought very big people in this field to Nepal because, you know, people fall off mountains over there. He has a particular grasp on Nepalese politics, and today he's going to tell us about what happened on this 8th and 9th of September when Nepal suddenly exploded. We had never seen such a thing. So, Kanak, you're there, and now I'm going to pull down the screen, and in just 30 seconds we'll be able to see you. And I think the projector is warming up. You'll be there very soon. Kanak, give us a bit of a background as to why this suddenly flared up on the 8th of September, which is just 5 weeks ago or so. We heard this news that normally peaceful Nepal has gone up in flames, and we saw that the important buildings in Kathmandu were actually on fire, and then something like 70 students, 70 people in all, were killed. Normally, we are used to hearing of Nepalese as being very non-violent, peaceful people, not like us over here. We're just through a period of extreme violence. And in fact, we couldn't have shows at the Black Hole for 3 days at a stretch because of what was happening in Lahore, and which threatened to spill over. So give us a bit of a background.
Thank you, Pervez. And I feel, and I am a part of the Black Hole fraternity. So very happy to be here with you and talking to you before your live audience as well as the online audience. And from Nepal, we do observe Pakistan a lot because Pakistan is always in the news, whether it is floods or whether it is violence of all kinds in various parts. In that sense, Nepal has reveled in a country that does not make much news. And that's how it should be. News often, especially news covered by Western media, is one that looks for horrors and disasters. And the fact that one is a black hole of news, so to speak, out of which only silence emanates, is good news, meaning that the population is at ease, relatively speaking. But of course, that is no longer the case for Nepal. It's not that we have had a peaceful history, but most of the violence in Nepal has been essentially focused and centered in the darbars, the palaces. The intrigues and the killings had tended to happen in the palaces, whereas the first time that violence, physical, material violence, actually entered the Nepali village landscape was during the Maoist insurgency of 1996 to 2006. So in that sense, Nepal has indeed gone through a racking period of violence that touched lives across the country, led to many changes, including economic downturn to demographic shifts and migrations and all that. But what was different on two things. There are two events, Pervez. One is the day of the demonstration, which cannot be characterized as a day of rioting. That is the 8th of September, which led into the 9th of September, when there was this explosion and implosion of Nepal and its state institutions. And that is, I think, what you want to know mostly about, because that is what made the news. That is what made friends of Nepal around South Asia and elsewhere worry for the country and the trajectory of our society, which has been a society that, in relative terms, has been the most open and democratic of South Asia. I mean, looking at Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and now India, we did take satisfaction in the fact that the Indians and the Pakistanis and the Bangladeshis all come to Kathmandu to meet each other. And that is something we have to keep intact. But we had such a shake-up that there will be challenges before us to maintain Nepal's role as an open
So
society.
before
So,
you
with
go,
that bit of background, should I get in the topic?
before you get to the 9th of September, tell us what inspired the 8th of September. Why is
Indeed.
cutting off the internet such a big deal? I mean, if the internet goes off over here, people will crib a little bit, but they won't get out onto the streets. What made the youth, the Gen Z, in Kathmandu and elsewhere to become so agitated about it?
Well, yeah, we can't talk about September 9th without getting into what happened on September the 8th. So the September the 8th, and forgive me if I go to very deep background, because events such as these can't be explained with a quick answer. But before we get into not the banning of social media, but the suspension of social media, what had happened was, firstly, keep in mind Nepal is an open society, and hence there all the news that authorities would want suppressed is way out in the open. So much of media is state monitored and controlled in so much of South Asia. Nepal is a more of an anarchic situation, a democratic anarchy, if you will. So the media, the information was out there, and the government, including the government which just fell, that of KP Oli, was not the autocracy of most of the rest of South Asia. And so it could not, when it tried to do certain things, it didn't have full command and control of the discourse. So over the last 10 years, and actually it started with the Constitution of 1990, which made Nepal a truly open democratic society. And since then, media has been open through highs and lows, through difficult times, including the insurgency, yet it has remained open. One of the things it has done best is investigate and bring out stories of corruption in high places, corruption by state officials. And from I'll just give you names and titles without giving you details, from a cooperative scam to land scams to fake refugee scams to gold smuggling scams, you name it. And our politicians and the wheeler dealers have been involved. The newspapers have been reporting it continuously, very professional. But what has happened is that um, the investigating agencies did not follow through. So that has created a platform of sense of injustice among the people of Nepal, including the Gen Z generation, the younger generation. So that has been boiling up. Then the trigger was the government of Nepal, the government of KP Oli decided that there is a need to control the social media to the extent that there is great difficulty in investigating cybercrime and sexual harassment and other issues, because there is no local office of, let's say, a Facebook or a WhatsApp or the very powerful portals that essentially take profits of content created in the global south and elsewhere and enrich the billionaires in Silicon Valley. But the government did not go that deep, and there may even have been some nefarious intent in the government to control social media, because social media, with its populist algorithm driven critiques of authority certainly made the politicians unhappy. However, I personally believe that it was not improper to want uh, to ask the grand social media apps and platforms to say have a contact office in Kathmandu so that we don't have to go through Delhi or Singapore to report a cyber crime and ask you to investigate through your systems. That is all that essentially that was asked. And had, for example, LinkedIn or Facebook or WhatsApp done what TikTok already does and Viber already does, which is to have a contact person, then the government would not shut you down. But the government mismanaged. It did not understand that social media seeped into the was essentially a controlling mechanism of Nepali society, not just uh, apps used for small businesses, for communications between Nepalis within the country and the great diaspora overseas in the Gulf and Malaysia, but also social media was an addiction, as elsewhere in South Asia and elsewhere. They did not realize the government, when the way they did it, it was very brusque. And even though it had sent letters for months in advance to the social media platforms, they didn't come back. Now, who was the most angered by this was the younger generation that were using social media apps the most. So they decided to call a demonstration on the 8th of September. They called it at, I think, 8:30 or 9, 8:30 on the 8th at a particular point in Kathmandu city called Maitigar Mandala. In short, now, this is the background. This rather modest sized demonstration may have been seven, maximum 4 or 5 thousand, suddenly swelled in size. And the very organizers started saying, this is out of our control, go home. We have done what we wanted to do. But this crowd surged towards parliament. The police was lax, perhaps with poor intelligence. It did not have enough uh, policemen on the ground. It did not do the crowd control mechanisms that we understand the Nepali police has used in the past until the crowd was exactly at parliament. When they reached parliament, what some of the organizers have told me, the Gen Z generation organizers have told me, is that they were professional looking people that try to break in to the parliamentary compound by professionally bringing down walls and barricades to go in. At that time, so-called Special Task Force of the Nepali Police was inside. It was a last resort protection force, and it uses live bullets, not rubber bullets. At that time, mayhem ensued. 19 dead on the first day. When the first killing happened, already I was saying this is now going bad. But minute by minute, hour by hour, the numbers escalated. So we had 19 dead that day, 21 in all from wounds of that day. But altogether, more than 70 dead, most of them not part of the crowd that was doing the agitation, but people who were caught in fires in arsons that were created, or police or people that escaped from prisons who were caught or killed while escaping, etc. But anyway, September 8th, that happened. By the end of September 8th, by that evening, we knew that the next day would have been horrific and that the prime minister should resign. The prime minister, known to be more headstrong in retrospect than what is good for the country, decided that he had done nothing wrong and the state mechanisms had failed, but he was responsible enough. So he did not take moral responsibility when something as horrific as 19 dead as announced had happened. And I would have thought that was enough to resign. He did not. The fact that he didn't resign and a interim government not immediately announced when he was still in command, all kinds of things went haywire. from that onward to the next day. So that's how we move into the 9th of September,
Okay,
Pervez.
now the students that you met who told you that they were professionals, agent provocateurs, what was their speculation? Who were they? Where did they come in from? After all, if this is something that's spontaneously organized and it's done just over a day or two, these people must have been in the waiting for a long time. If they are so well trained, as you say, then who are they? Where did they come from?
How well they were organized and how well they were trained is actually more clearer the day after. However, that day we can only it can only be a matter of conjecture what happened because nobody is coming out with press releases on this particular topic. I think there is a interesting and dangerous mix of individuals who wanted not just the government down, but the system to fall, meaning the constitutional system of Nepal, which was put in place in 2015. That constitutional system to be brought down. So that seems to be the goal. It is it looks likely. I have to choose my words because I cannot say for sure exactly what happened. But even now, starting from 9 and 10 itself, I have believed, and my belief has not changed, that there were groups waiting for something, for a trigger that they could utilize to escalate. Agent provocateurs or infiltrators who were lying on the side. We can only say who might have they been. And there I will lay before you the situation where how is it, as seems clear, that a relatively modest group of youngsters meeting to protest, and I failed to mention earlier, the protest was certainly the trigger was the social media suspension, but it was also malgovernance and corruption. Corruption most of all, because social media had been rife as all over the world, but elsewhere things don't trigger the way it is, either because countries are too large or because countries are not democratic. That's one thing you should, I hope, keep in mind that Nepal was an open enough society, and as a result, our police and our institutions were not on guard or were not able to crack down on the 9th of September the way an autocratic society might have. So, in that sense, the trigger where social media suspension and malgovernance, which was being reported all the time, and what the term, as you know, nepo kids, nepotistically promoted kids of the high and mighty. So social media, there were certain individuals, no more than a handful, who were flaunting their international travel, their Gucci bags, etc. Most significantly among them was the daughter of the Maoist chieftain, and that hit even more so because he is the Maoist, and the most corrupt of the leaders happens to be the Maoist leader who was fighting against all of these things, and his children are showing all this
So, are you talking
conspicuous.
about KP Sharma, Oli's children?
No,
Or
no,
no?
Mr. Pushpakamal Dahal Prachanda.
Ah,
That's Maoist chieftain because he's also been in and out of power. There are three main power centers who've been in a revolving door in the echelons of the prime minister's office. One is KP Sharma Oli, who is the present prime minister. One is Mr. Sherbadur Deuba, many time prime minister. And one is Pushpakamal Dahal, known to the world as Prachanda, the Maoist chieftain, who was also many times prime minister, but who, in my opinion, is who's dipping into corruption and conspicuous consumption uh, hit the people even more for all that he claimed to be a decade ago or so ago. So yeah, that's how the anger arose, and then we of course get into September 9. Your question was, who could it be? And I should perhaps I got waylaid a bit in what I had to say. The people who would benefit from the derailment, not just the fall of the KP Oli government, which was a democratic uh, government of elected parties in coalition, the two largest parties in coalition. Different story to that, but let's leave it at that. It was a democratic government, and it was running a ineffectual state, including police and intelligence, as is evident. So the people who would have benefited would be the royalists, people who were essentially defrocked when Nepal became a secular country, a republican country, and the monarchy, even the constitutional monarchy, was abolished in 2015. So the royal always hankered for restoring the monarchy of Nepal. Then you have the Maoists who had a in 2008 elections, and they've been declining since. And the Maoist chieftain and his uh, assistants in leadership would know their future is fraught. So any kind of collapse of the current system would be to their benefit. Then you have the Hindutva forces, the politicized Hindutva forces emanating from India but having a strong presence in Nepal, which we talked about when you were here, Pervez, in Kathmandu half a year ago. So all of these forces would be wanting to see a collapse of the Nepali government and the Nepali constitution. Added to that, without pointing any fingers for now because we don't know, but Nepal is in a very interesting geopolitical space. A, we have an open border with India. B, we are between India and China. And the week before, KP Oli, our Prime Minister, had visited the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which others did. Shahbaz Sharif did, as did Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of Pakistan and India. But then he also, like the Pakistani Prime Minister, attended the Victory Day parade uh, in Beijing, commemorating the anniversary of the defeat of the Japanese
Kanak,
and the end of the
Kanak,
Second World War.
there's a comparison that cries out, and that is with Bangladesh, the movement, the student-led movement that got rid of Sheikh Hasina. What similarities and differences do you see between that and this?
Well, if you look at unverified information, then you would say, well, there's probably some interventionism, foreign interventionism going. I will not say more than that because I don't have objective information to say other than the fact that in this world nothing happens. Uh, the feather does not move unless there is a breeze. However, let's compare Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. Sri Lanka had a movement, uh, whether it was also supported by certain foreign forces or not, who knows? But Sri Lanka landed feet first within the constitution. And I should also tell you, when the Sri Lankan demonstrators by the thousands moved into the presidential secretariat, and we know this wide footsteps leading up to this place next to the Gaul sea face in Colombo. When that happened, they were like, the demonstrators were like tourists by the thousands moving in and looking at everything, and they moved out peacefully. In the case of Bangladesh, the rioters moved into Sheikh Hasina's personal residence, meaning her official residence, and ransacked it. But they did not go after other state institutions. In the case of Nepal, the demonstrators seem to be in. This is now we're talking about 9th of September, coordinated arson across the country, not just Kathmandu Valley, destruction of the Supreme Court building and its records, destruction Parliament building and its records, and most significantly, the building known as Singha Darbar, the seat of the government of Nepal and the symbol of the Nepali state over its entire modern era. A building that had weakened in the earthquake of 2015 and also then revived and restored. This building was charred and so much of records gone. And there were Nepalis who went in, looted, and then torched. On the one hand, there seems to have been a planned exercise of arson throughout. It was electric, it happened all over at once. People were using walkie talkies, in social media, they were using geolocation to find the buildings of individual politicians, and they would go in with marked precision into a housing colony and just burn the house of that politician. And the neighbors might not even know sometimes that the neighboring house is that of a politician or of a high official. Very coordinated. So that is, your question was about Bangladesh and Nepal. I brought in Sri Lanka. uh, Nowhere in Bangladesh or in Sri Lanka did you see this coordinated attempt to destroy government records, government buildings, and lead to a situation where not only government institutions collapsed, but the faith of the Nepali public on their state, not just the government, would be shaken. That seems to have been the goal. And hence, one can only ask who would benefit from this. And some of the forces that I told you earlier are the suspects in my mind.
So, Indian newspapers thereafter were filled with items that this was a rising for creating a Hindu Rashtra in Nepal. Nepal has 80% Hindu population. Am I right in that? About 80?
Well, 80%, but it's amorphous Hinduism. I'll get to that.
Okay. So, were there actual chance for creating such a Hindu state in Nepal during those demonstrations? By the way, were
Absolutely.
you there? Were you able to see this personally? Or,
Yeah, I mean, I was in the neighborhood, but more than that, it is live. I mean, in these days, everything is live on WhatsApp and YouTube and social media. And interestingly, the very people conducting the arson, they are all of all of them will be identified if the police puts its mind to it, because everything is out. In that sense, there was absolute transparency in this arson, other than who put them to it, and we can get that to that as well. But your question was,
whether they were chanting for a Hindu Rashtra.
well, you see, in the case of Nepal, firstly, our kingship was a historical kingship, not the kingship of Bhutan, which was installed by work of the British later on, nor let's say the kingship of even Cambodia. Nepal's kingship is linked to the very creation of the nation state of Nepal in the mid 1700s. So in that sense, the kingship of Nepal and the Nepali nation state, which is actually, if you consider that India and Pakistan were created in 47, Sri Lanka in 48, Bangladesh in 71, Nepal is the oldest nation state of South Asia by far, one of the older nation states of the globe. In that sense, full credit to Nepal's kingship. But times moved on. The kings of Nepal successively, some well regarded, some not so well regarded, kept intervening in the affairs of democracy. And so at some point, the politicians decided, especially after the Maoists came above ground, and they needed a sop to prove to the cadre that they had given up they had achieved some goals rather than just come and given up on their so-called People's War. It was decided that the king, especially the last king, Gyanendra, who got into the throne after his brother and family and clan were massacred in the royal palace massacre of Narayanhiti. They saw that this man is always going to mess around with our democracy, so the kingship was given a goodbye in 2015 constitution. Otherwise, we had a constitutional monarchy. Now, There is the old guard that believes the king should come back as a constitutional monarch. I personally believe if the king were to come back as a constitutional monarch, his ability to meddle will be multiplied many times over than when he was a constitutional monarch. So, in the changed circumstances, he should not come back, is my personal view. Now, the Hindutva forces in India, and your question was directed towards the Indian media. The Indian media, of course, functions the way it understands the mainstream media, particularly the television media, which you probably watch in Pakistan unless it's banned, and Indian print media by and large. Some portals are outliers, but otherwise, Indian media functions the way they think on international affairs and regional affairs. They function the way they think New Delhi powers want them to think. So, in that sense, on Nepal, since they know that the BJP RSS government in New Delhi would like the idea of a reinstated Hindu state in Nepal, because that is also the goal of BJP RSS for India itself, that they would certainly propagate the idea that this movement was actually a movement for the restoration of monarchy. It can certainly have been a movement of the instigator for a restoration of monarchy, but there is no groundswell in Nepal for restoration of monarchy. So it would be more the agent provocateurs that you talked about earlier. So Nepal, to get back to being what the strategists, perhaps, including in India, who would want Nepal to go back to a Hindu state, realize that Nepal going to back to a Hindu state would require the king to be reinstated because he is to be meant to be born Hindu. So, if the king were reinstated, then you could say, oh, Nepal is now back to being a Hindu kingdom, i.e., a Hindu Rashtra, a Hindu state. So, that could be the main reason why the Indian media got super excited and wanted to jump the gun and essentially set the agenda for Nepali movement. And they may even have succeeded because unlike in Pakistan, the Nepali and in Bangladesh, large portions of the Nepali population do follow the Hindi channels of India and Hindi YouTube channels. And so it could also have been an attempt to create facts on the ground, even though there was no groundswell in Nepal for a return to monarchy or a return to a Hindu Rashtra.
So, Kanak, inform us on this. Does Gyanendra live in Nepal, or has he fled the country? And now that
No, no.
now that he doesn't have any sons left, they got all wiped out in the palace massacre. Who would be following him?
No, no. Gyanendra's family is intact. His son has been known to be involved in several incidents, some of it drug related, etc. So he's in a way been disowned by his own family, but the family at large is intact. In fact, Gyanendra, I have a view that is on Gyanendra that you may call nuanced. When the Royal Palace massacre happened, he lost his entire clan other than his family. His wife was attending that event where the crown prince shot everybody dead. And his wife, meaning Queen, who became Queen Komal, had a bullet near to her heart through her lungs. Um, and lost some of, I think, injured her fingers also with bullets. Gyanendra was elsewhere. When Gyanendra came back, he was left with everybody dead, his brothers, his sisters-in-law, his nephews, nieces, everybody dead. But never got the sympathy that you should get, because everybody from day one started accusing him of being the instigator of the plot of regicide and killing of his clan and brothers. Not true. He never did it. However, he did and he does have an autocratic streak. He showed that once he became king. We won't get into that right now. I don't think there is time. But let me just say that Gyanendra has been accused of things he never did. But one thing that I do consider him worthy of accusation is that he was an autocrat. He thought he knew the best for the country when he did not. And he was certainly not a democratically inclined person, which is why he conducted the coup, which we fought against, for which also I paid my price with my wife entering jail and all that. That's a separate matter. But for now, as it relates to today, Gyanendra has been, he didn't leave the country. In fact, his was a very civilized departure in 2015 from the palace. You don't find this happening in countries. And the credit can go not so much to Gyanendra as to the country that is Nepal. He called a press conference and he announced his departure from the palace and he went to his private residence. He's been living in Nepal since. On occasion, I myself have had reason to write articles telling Gyanendra not to start becoming political, because then you won't even get the respect you deserve as an ex-monarch in Nepal. So to that extent, I think he's been now in the last 2 3 years, perhaps thinking that he's getting on in age and he wants to get back to the throne. He's been acting more political than he likes to have. He's got the support, in particular, of the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, whose name is the Yogi, whose name is Adityanath. And he obviously has been trying to curry favor with the power centers in New Delhi, BJP, RSS, etc., knowing that their interest in bringing Nepal back into Hindu Rashtra and their understanding that that can't happen without the king being put back on the throne. So he's tried to make common cause with them, but his belief is flawed. In March, he tried to instigate a kind of an insurrection that flopped. It could be, therefore, his own people that were at the forefront of that activity. As I said, the people who were probably doing the arson and the loot of the second day. Perhaps I should go a little bit more into what happened that second day. But in terms of who might have been involved, as I said, royalist forces, Hindutva forces, Maoist, ex-Maoist, as well as 2 or 3 newborn political parties who believe that they can ride the swell of the Gen Z to a quick election and do better and best the mainstream parties of the past. So they too seem to have been involved in that episode of 9 September. But let me just quickly then tell you what happened then. Not only did we have simultaneous and seemingly planned arson across the country, but also pinpointed arson of individual houses, business people's houses, uh, 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 and the main center that produces, the only center that produces driving licenses, embossed licenses, razed to the ground. Government lawyers' offices, the attorney general's offices around the country burned to the ground. Supreme Court records burned to the ground. The National Archives, thankfully, was saved because the officials there quickly wrote out 3 by 4 A4 size placards saying this is national treasure, and they got the demonstrations themselves to those placards in front of our National Archive. That is how the National Archive was saved.
This is
But
very
so much
frightening.
as was lost.
This is very frightening. Now, before we go to the audience, my last question.
Sure.
You now have an interim prime minister, Sushila Karki.
Yes.
She appears to be a straightforward person. I have no idea, but I would like your opinion on that. And for your final wrap-up, tell us what you think is going to happen 6 months from now, when the elections take place.
Okay. The Constitution of Nepal stipulates that when you call for election, when a government collapses, new government is required, election.
Can you hear me?
March
So your picture has
2006.
frozen.
Okay,
Okay,
my
so now
internet.
we're
Can you
back.
hear me though?
Yeah. So repeat what you said in the last 30 seconds,
Okay,
if you can. Yeah.
okay. Just a little bit about Bangladesh because you did ask me, and that'll feed into your question. Bangladesh seems to be more in a black hole than Nepal right now, if I might use the term, because Bangladesh election more uncertain than in Nepal. And in Bangladesh, the youth who are said to have taken over might be giving way, from what I hear, to the Islamists and the youth among the Islamists. So, in that sense, we have a job in Nepal to make sure that we do not go in a direction where there is a weakening of the Nepali state to make it a playing ground for international forces, mainly China, India, and the Americans, who have a great and deep interest in Nepal. Chinese have an interest in Nepal. Indians have always been intervening in Nepal and have an interest in Nepal. Also, because we have an open border with India, which is in need of regulation, but there is no regulation as we speak. So that is the background. And your question was uh, about the current government. The government, we met the president of Nepal who saved the constitution halfway. When the prime minister was told by the security forces, we can't protect you anymore, and there is danger to the lives of all ministers, they are all helicoptered out. But what was done for the security of the individual ministers quickly turned into house arrest. The ministers and the main leaders were not allowed to talk to each other. Their mobile phones were taken away, as also with the prime minister. Of the judges, when the chief justice said nothing doing and they backed away. This is the army. So the army seems to have had an agenda to create facts on the ground while the politicians and the political parties were out of the picture, and they needed to do it quickly within 2 days when the telephones were away and the little amount of noise that was coming out of the political parties in that situation of mayhem and fear. And I must tell you, never have I personally felt that much fear in Nepal than September 9th, the next day when the mayhem happened. So, in that sense, the army's role, which we have not talked about, the army's role needs to be questioned. Why was it that you took away the prime minister and held him incommunicado? Number one. And number two, why did you not save these great institutions? Because you are the only entity on the ground that had the capability of arousing fear amidst the rioters. Why did you allow, you have a battalion within Singh Darbar, 800 strong. Why was, and those buildings, Supreme Court's uh, national, the National Secretariat, Singh Darbar, and the Parliament are within 2 kilometers of the army's headquarters. Why did you not save it? Are the questions that have to be answered. And one thing I also didn't say earlier, among the chaos of the 9th of September, one particular political party had a leader in jail. This is the party that also hopes to make great gains in the March elections. He was released he essentially was guilty of jailbreak by the mob. However, in doing that, 14,000 prisoners escaped from prisons all over Nepal, and there are at that time, more than 1,500 arms of the police looted, many of them automatic. An incredible uh, departure, which makes even the upcoming elections fraught because so much criminality and guns out there. As far as the current government is concerned, this government, made up of Mrs. Sushila Karki and a technocratic government, it has been created outside of the constitution. As the president told us when we went to meet him, President Ramchandra Paudel, who's had a good role after he was released, so to speak, from house arrest of the army. which has to be questioned. It's already being questioned as we speak. He said to us, the constitution has been impacted, but only to the extent of the appointment of the prime minister, because the prime minister has to be from parliament. Beyond that, he said, this government is a government meant to run elections. It is a Chunavi Sarkar, and by 7th of March, with the elections, even the constitution will be back on track. The question today is the government of Nepal made up of these technocrats? Thus far, no Gen Z among them. Okay, some populist individuals have been inducted, but no Gen Z as we speak today, on the 15th of October.
But here again, there's a similarity
Yeah,
with Muhammad Yunus
I'll just
in
finish.
in
I will just
yeah,
finish on this
yeah.
line. The Prime Minister of Nepal is headstrong, but she's also has always been a critic of the political parties. But to that extent, there is not a problem. The Home Minister has been, who's an activist lawyer, has no love lost for the political parties, the mainstream political parties. He has been making mistakes, including an egregious letter to the police from a week ago saying, do not investigate the people who created the violence and the arson of the 9th of September. A letter as specific as that. So that has us worried. Sorry.
Yes. Okay, so there are lots of open questions up ahead. Still, it's, I think, quite promising that in Nepal you have Sushila Karke, and in Bangladesh you have Muhammad Yunus at the head of affairs. And so one can be reasonably optimistic about where these two countries are going to go in the months to come. Do you share that opinion? And after your reply, we go straight to the audience.
I believe that both with Mr. Yunus and Mr. Sushila Kaki, they may not command the polity as much as we would hope them to. Because Sushila Karki is a steadfast person, as I told you, but she does not, does she have the political uh, capacity to deal with the challenges, especially from the political parties that will come in the days ahead, when her home minister, who is her trusted colleague, is a wild card. So I worry on that count, the same way I worry whether Mr. Muhammad Yunus has the capacity to deal with the Islamists as they start making demands and upon demands, which will make the election exercise fraught.
Okay, so now let's go to the audience. Who would like to ask the first question? Yeah. Please
Thank
introduce
you.
yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, my question is when we see the scenario in Bangladesh and Nepal and elsewhere, the basic energy which brought changes, it was the Gen Z. But the problem is, I'm asking you, when they overthrow the regime, we do not find, this is the dilemma, I think. You agree or not? The regime is overthrown, but we see that there is no clear-cut direction in the aftermath. And what do you see? There will be a drastic change in the near future. Like, if, for example, I see, will there be a very visible and revolutionary change in the election process to make it accessible to the common man? Because if we see, when the old regime is overthrown, the old elite, for some time, they hide, they are invisible, and we see the newly rich peoples come to the power and again go the same way. So do you see that the common man will have access in the true sense in terms of finances? Because people cannot afford to elections. If you bring revolutionary changes in this, what do you see in Nepal? Is there something in pipeline?
Firstly, many people, thank you for the question. Many people misread the situation in Nepal and call it a revolution. In what is more correct, it would be that there was a 3-hour demonstration on the 8th of September by the Gen Z that escalated and was hijacked to create the events, including the attack on the movement into the parliament, which then led to killings by state mechanism, by policemen, which was something that should have led to the resignation of the sitting prime minister. But it was not a revolution. The looseness with which in Nepali media calls both days, September 8 and September 9, holistically Gen Z movement, not true. One day was a demonstration that led to police killings. Second day was rioting, which is the title of this program. So, firstly, the Gen Z that called movement, their plans were much more modest, not the destruction of the Nepali state, not even the fall of the government was not there. Those were things that happened in the course of some planned exercise that forced the ground, and then the army got into the act, and then the other forces got involved. But I believe that Nepal, to answer your question more directly, no country can be a utopia, but no country can move ahead through revolution. Revolution kills its own offspring, without a doubt. And so, what we need is evolution, and Nepal was well on the road to evolution. So, I believe that our goal should be holding of elections on the 6th of March 2026, bringing all the political parties together, even those that suspect this current government, but that is the job of civil society to make sure that this government is also held to account. Going back to the next constitution and the demand that there is for amendments to this constitution, which is not an improper demand, but that requires 2/3 majority. So we implore political parties to activate through their manifestos for the kind of changes they would want in the constitution of Nepal of 2015. Otherwise, we can't go around changing constitutions every decade, which is what we've been doing. So, answer to your question, sir, is they did not demand this. Let that be clear. They demanded accountability from government. They wanted restoration of social media, and but then it was taken way beyond pale. The reason people around the world might be confused of this is because the world has paid momentary attention to Nepal and have moved on. So in the mind of the world public who are paying attention, this is a Gen Z movement and their demand. But however, we cannot at all dismiss the demands for good governance against corruption, and that has to be the agenda, not just of Gen Z. And when you talk about Gen Z, I should make one interesting point. Gen Z, its term itself implies it is an imported term because it starts with the baby boomers, millennials, etc., Gen Z. Whereas in South Asia, realistically, because we are in the Anglophone arena of the British Empire, even Nepal, though it was not colonized. So for us, it's actually should be Gen Z and not Gen
Okay,
Z.
correct,
But we
correct.
keep saying Gen Z.
Okay, we have another question. Yeah.
Dixit ji, I wanted to ask you about human development of Nepal. Where does it stand in terms of healthcare and education? Do you have good schools, colleges, and universities? And is it true that Nepal came into being because of the invaders from Afghanistan and Central Asia? And many rich Hindus, they moved to Nepal because it was safer than Lahore and Delhi?
Okay, two questions there. I'll answer the second one because it's easier. No, Nepal, some of Nepali elites have wanted to say that some of their ancestries go back to or Rajasthan or to Kanyakumari for the Brahmins and Rajasthan for the rulers. But Nepal is a country made up of diverse castes and ethnicities. It's unique in all of South Asia that there has been a mixing of villages, not mixing of populations, mixing of villages. So Nepal is a diverse country, but you can never say like you can in Afghanistan that is a Pashtun area or that is a Uzbek area, etc. You know, but Nepal in that sense was protected from invaders because of um, the jungles of the Tarai, a term that you have in Pakistan as well, the region just south of the lowest Himalaya hills. So the Nepal retained to the modern era the malarial jungles, which saved us from invaders from the south, and the Himalaya saved us from invaders from the north, which is why Nepal as a whole, but in particular Kathmandu Valley, evolved as such a cauldron of cultural achievement. Your question otherwise was, I'm sorry?
It was on educational quality,
Human development.
I'm going to talk a little bit about that because I had a bit of experience after your invitation 6 months ago or so. But go ahead, please,
Yeah, HDI.
and add in your efforts to create a South Asian university and tell us
Thank
how
you.
far
Thank
that's
you.
gone.
I will do that. Yes. Human Development Index, everything being relative, Nepal's Human Development Index, I can't give you the exact number and figure, but in relation to the rest of South Asia, we're not that bad. In fact, for that reason, we are about to, till recently, until this mayhem, we're about to graduate from lowest LDC status to developing country status, number one. Number two, we are certainly behind Bangladesh, especially because of Bangladesh, the way it advanced with its apparel industry and started doing good for its population, and Sri Lanka and South India. But compared to the immediate neighbor, which means Bihar, Eastern Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, West Bengal, and Eastern UP meaning Purvanchal, Nepal does well. And the proof of that is seen in the fact that while Nepalis migrate overseas, the poorest from India's poorest parts come to Nepal. So, Nepal, in that sense, even though we had this horrific 10-year insurgency, we are in the socio-economic index not as bad as you would expect. And in the social index, particularly in women and child mortality and women's place in society, Nepal does relatively well, especially in the eastern hills. The space of women is better than in the far western hills and in the plains. So, relatively speaking, Nepal does not too poorly, even with the bad governance we've had.
And your university.
Yes, one reason Nepal is, people are wanting to leave their country all over the world, right? Pakistanis want to go to the US, Chinese do, Indians do. Everybody is trying to get through now. The Darien Gap is closed, but everybody would want to aim for the Darien Gap or take the boats into Europe. So Nepal is not an exception. Bhutan is emptying of its youngsters, all of them going to Australia. So in that sense, Nepal is not an outlier. However, Nepali media is so effective in the Nepali. We don't have the distinction between English and Urdu in Pakistan or English Hindi you have in northern India. So Nepali media has been so effective that it has, because of the narrative is such that we are a failed country and therefore we have to leave the country. The narrative in the public, including among the Gen Z, is that Nepal is a failure much more than we are. That is number one. Number two, when Nepal has so much in the form of resources, we have hydropower, we have tourism, and we have a very interesting social mix that makes sure that we don't have great conflagrations such as you have in so many parts of South Asia. And as far as governance is concerned, Nepal is the only country in South Asia that does not have a death penalty. Nepal's Supreme Court passes down its judgments in the Nepali language, not in English, unlike all other countries of South Asia. So there are so many good things. Our community forestry, for example, local participation, our new constitution, which is so inclusive, and local government is given funds, etc. If you look at the plus in Nepal, there's a lot of pluses, but the public is not convinced of that because the delivery has not been there. However, I still say, and the reason we need to have social science, humanities, education, or liberal arts is that people are not given a perspective on where, and neither is it happening in the rest of South Asia. So, answer your question, Pervez, thank you for that entry. Um, Firstly, we felt that in the case of Nepal, we don't have social science education worth the name. In undergrad, we don't have liberal arts. In postgrad, humanities education that will lead to people towards policy work, academia, teaching, whatever. We don't have that. So when you don't have learning, when you don't teach people geography, economics, history, philosophy, it's a problem. I know in Pakistan as much as in the rest of in India. I'm not even talking about government school education, which is uniformly abysmal all over South Asia, and we're ruining our future. But we felt that where can we tackle this issue at the master's level? So we've started the South Asian Institute for History and Philosophy, which is to give a master's education, 2 years course in Kathmandu for Nepalis, but also given that the same Malays in other parts of South Asia, to open up to student bodies from Pakistan and Sri Lanka and India and Bangladesh to meet in Kathmandu's milieu and do it. We've started the college, open our courses. We do other ancillary courses, but our master's course, which is our flagship course, will start in February 2026. And I'm hoping, I'm talking to friends in Pakistan as well, that we want to begin with a sprinkling of students. More than a sprinkling, 2-3 students from each country. If we could only have that, we could start building the idea of South Asia for the sake not of a unified South Asia, but a decentralized South Asia. Because I feel the idea of South Asia, because Pervez did introduce me as a South Asianist as well. The idea is South Asia is not a SARC South Asia. SARC should happen. The SARC summit planned long for more than a decade ago for Islamabad should happen, but SARC is not South Asia. South Asia as an idea, as a concept, is a social justice concept. It's an economic growth concept. So, but I feel we don't study it enough. So among other things, our masters will try to deal with the study of South Asia.
Okay, before we go to the last question, I can't resist answering Shakil's question. So I've gone to Tribhuvan University in Kathmandu a couple of times, and it's not impressive at all. In fact, it's like maybe the University of Gujarat, which is very poor. But on this trip, 6 months ago, I went to at least 8 or 9 schools in Kathmandu and 2 or 3 other 2 towns other than that. And I came back very impressed when I compared the knowledge of those students there with the knowledge of students here in Islamabad or Lahore. They are way ahead of us. Even the government schools, Kanak, those two were not bad. Your school was excellent, of course, but your school is for the super elite.
Yes.
But it was really an eye-opener for me how low we are on the scale of educational achievement.
2 questions. One, it seems am I correct to assume from this particular incident of September 8th that the youth there, I won't call it any generation, but the youth is well politicized? That's my first question. And what happened actually? Was there a rural-urban divide? Was there a class divide in this anger, in this whatever happened there on not on the 9th but on the 8th? Or was this just a few rich kids who had been affected? I would like to know that. And secondly, the second question is, do you see any chances of this sense of disenfranchisement and disempowerment crystallizing into a broader youth movement? Or maybe it can be hijacked, this discontent may be hijacked like it has been in Pakistan by Imran Khan. So what are your thoughts on that?
Firstly, as to who made up this dissatisfied generation, definitely it was those who had access to social media, which most do, but also had the time and had the ability to talk to each other. So there was definitely a class element in this, but not such a big one, because there were people from all over, all parts of Nepal, but mostly resident in Kathmandu. So to that extent, in one sense, it did not reflect the rural masses. At the same time, it was not an elite group. It because people with access to social media now do not represent the topmost layer or the creamy layer. So there's quite a give. So you could say that it was representative enough of Nepal as a whole. However, among them, there is already, given that they started out as a kind of a monolithic group, everybody calling them Gen Z, but then the army cherry picked some people to represent them. This is the question that still has not been answered properly. How did that happen? But the army cherry picked and presented them to the president as the representative of the Gen Z. To some extent they did, to some extent they didn't. And now questions are arising because now there are many Gen Z groups that are called Gen Z Indigenous, Gen Z Madesi from the plains, Gen Z from different categories that you would find it natural, because Gen Z represents a generation. And while those that call that event on the 8th of March were not a class-based elite group, but certainly differentiated from the larger Nepali public, would it trigger into a larger movement? I think not. I think if there were to be a larger movement, it would be done by those that hijacked it the next day. Because the Gen Z people themselves are now questioning themselves, what is it that has happened? And how come we are being named for the mayhem of the second day as well? What is our role in that? We didn't have a role in that. That type of thing is happening. About whether this generation is more politicized than the earlier ones, let me tell you something. This is a good question, Sadia, and I'll respond to it with a few sentences, if I may. Nepal's middle generation, meaning those in their 40s, late 30s, 40s, 50s, they were in this era when there was a lot of funding and there was a lot of Kathmandu centricism. So if you were in Kathmandu and the donors were pushing money into Nepal because Nepal was a country coming out of conflict, post-conflict, constitution writing, so a lot of our people who might have become politicized became NGOized. Nothing wrong with NGO. What happened, and I'm part of many, but when you are NGOized as a term, you become apolitical and you become a careerist. I believe that on the one hand, the era of funding has ended. Secondly, these kids are open to a lot of information and they are now being confronted with something that was by their involvement. So they are in an incredible learning trajectory. And that makes for being politicized. I believe I've already met a few of this generation, and some of them are opportunists like anybody else. One of them just wants to be made a minister for a month, he said. He told somebody I know. Because that way his political career will get a plus. So you have that type as well. There are others. The Maoist party has created a red Gen Z section in their party hierarchy, trying to take advantage. But by and large, the thinking among the youngsters are in a highly in a learning mode, and they are being politicized for the right reason, the way that their previous generation never got politicized.
Kanak,
So
we
I
are
think,
running out of time.
yeah, I think that's
And
how I
yeah,
see.
there are two questions. Yes, please go ahead.
So thank you, Mr. Dixit. This is Moeen Bartley. So a quick question for you, which is that there seems to be a situation where situations can be taken advantage of by particular forces, and what can be done in the society, in Nepali society, to ensure that this doesn't happen again? And if you're in the midst, let's say, of a manipulation by particular forces, and now you have the election coming up, now could this be the step two? Let's say if this whole thing was planned, and or even if the trigger was sort of spontaneous, but then day two was planned, then how can you prevent? The first question is, how can you prevent the election from being manipulated as a sort of result of this opportunity? And then in the future, how can such manipulation by powerful forces be prevented?
Yes, I do believe that the first day was spontaneous, the second day was manipulated, and by now, we know to be aware of further manipulation up ahead. And the way I would answer your question, because I tend to answer long, this one I'll try to keep brief because I know the time is short, is by energizing the political parties which right now feel humiliated and ousted, to give them energy to say that in the end, you cannot run away from elections, participate with full energy. And so we need to motivate the political parties. Some of them are already becoming motivated, such as the Nepali Congress, which yesterday took some significant decisions to go for elections while waiting for some writs against the current setting up of the current government. Whereas the other large party, UML, is reluctant because the Prime Minister himself feels humiliated and he needs vindication by essentially saying that this government is illegitimate. But I think what we have to be able to say is we had a quick departure away from the constitution. The way to get back to the constitution is 6 March elections. If we can convince the government and the parties, that's the first step for us to answer your question. The second is to watchdog this government so that it actually makes the elections happen. I myself have worries about whether the elections will be free and fair, because in Nepal, by and large, in the modern era, they have been free and fair.
We go to the last question now.
And I'll be very quick. It's been a pleasure listening to you. I'd just like to add one or two quick comments. You mentioned education at the schools that you visited, Pervez, in Kathmandu. The education is compulsory and free. For 10 years, I believe, in Nepal. It's been there for many, many years. That explains it. And I also saw this firsthand. I was there in your country about 20 years ago with Qasim Jar. There was this South Asia, the Asia Australian Conference, and we saw all that. But wonderful people. But one other thing, there is a problem, which is you are landlocked completely. And India is your hope and your nemesis and everything combined together. I'll share something with you. When I was in government, the Afghan Transit Trade Agreement started. And then it stopped very quickly soon afterwards, because one of the containers coming in through India towards Afghanistan had Gurkha soldiers in it. So they were discovered, the Gurkhas were discovered.
That's something I didn't know.
Why were they going to Afghanistan?
The Gurkhas have been acting as, let's say, mercenaries for many countries, and they go and work for the British, for example. They work for many other countries also. And talked about the economy. 67% of your exports and imports both are with India. So India does have a stranglehold, a bit of it, on Nepal. So the Gurkhas is a good example of what happened to the soldiers going to Afghanistan.
right?
But that's something new because these were supposed to be traveling. So I'm surprised to know that there were Gurkhas in those things. But there's something certainly that needs to be understood better, I guess. But the point you made about Nepal being landlocked, indeed, Nepal is landlocked between China, Tibet, and India. But it is less landlocked now than it was before. Also because of the incredible rise of technology and government infrastructure in Pakistan, sorry, in China, there has been the railroad that has arrived in Lhasa and as far as Shigatse, which is very close to Nepal, by 2006 arrived in Shigatse. It'll move westward, and meaning it'll come closer and closer to Nepal's northern border. Nepal has the just defrocked prime minister, fallen prime minister, KP Oli, in his earlier term, signed 3 agreements, trade and transit agreements, third country container agreement, transmission agreement. So the paperwork is already in place for Nepal to also be linked to the north. But for now, lots of goods do come in from the north, which used to be only coming in from Calcutta port. So that's a fact. Nepal should engage more and have a more balanced trajectory for its international trade and linkages. And the north is no longer an impossibility, whereas we lived most of our lives thinking that we were India locked. We're no longer India locked, but we need to make more of our links to the north.
Well, thank you very much, Kanak. That was wonderfully illuminating. We learned a lot about Nepal and really what led to this whole thing, and then what happened on September 9th. There are, of course, things that look dark, but when one looks at the totality, it's so much brighter than what we can see over here in Pakistan. Well, we wish you the very best. We wish Nepal the very best. And it's been wonderful talking to you. So thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pervez, and present, and the black hole. Goodbye.